So we've had a little audible change here, and so I'm going to go through some of these slides very quickly. I've not always been an academic. I used to be a service provider. I also was a deputy minister of the Department of Human Services in Pennsylvania and in charge of disability, where the rule was 3 people could live together, no more than 3. We closed the largest institution in Pennsylvania, 2,400 people. No one lived with more than 2 other people, and we did it economically. So size does matter. Those of you who are science fiction fans, Godzilla has changed in size over time. So a little bit of background. I'll skip through some things, but it started with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it talked about rights are only good if you have them where you live. And you'll get a copy of this later. So the preamble of the CRPD has lots of good things and good words and strong words about discrimination and deinstitutionalization, but institutions are a form of discrimination. I'll skip that and I'll skip that. So I talk a lot to families and to people with intellectual disabilities, and they all talk about basically the same things. They don't want programs, they want an individual life, and they want to be supported the way they want to be supported, not the way a cookie cutter program works. We've made some progress in the U.S. We have 169,000 people in big places, some public, some private, in a country of 319 million. You have 10,000 in a country of 8 million. Do the math. You have about 10 times the number that we do. But we have 11 states with population larger total than Israel with no institutions. So we've done that. We started in deinstitutionalization. I've been doing this since 1974. Started with the rejection of the medical model of care. It expressed itself by moving things to the community. We sort of went through 4 changes: normalization, inclusion, self-determination, and supports. So normalization, Wolfensberger out of Canada, and then Syracuse University just exposed large institutions for what they were. And the big institutions in the States are no longer what they used to be. They don't smell anymore. They're not dirty. People aren't huddled in masses. Though if you go to Eastern and Central Europe, you'll see that. Then we talked about inclusion a lot, and we got rid of home-like and job-like programs, because you can still be very institutionalized living with 3 or 4 other people. And then we talked about self-determination, giving people control over resources in their own lives. And finally, we talked about supports, which is the fit between the person and where they live. And if you try to fill that gap between what they can do and what they need, you're much better off. So here's what the data tells us. And this is not all the data, and I cited the studies at the end. But basically, people do better in small places. It's a pretty large study. Do better in small places. Another study, and yet another study. They all show the same thing. They all show the same thing. Now the challenge with social science research is it's not pure research like medical professionals wouldn't do it. We won't take this half of the room, we'll institutionalize you for 10 years and we'll measure your progress. This half of the room you can live with 2 other people, and 10 years from now we'll come to some conclusion. You can't do that. So all the studies are retrospective. Eric Emerson did his in Great Britain. So here's what we know. And I could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. On and on and on and on and on and on. On and on. I could just keep on going on and on. But we've learned people do better outside of institutions than inside. It doesn't matter how significant your disability is, and we can do things in a cost-effective manner. So now what? There's something the environmentalists use called the precautionary principle. When you translate that to human services, to public policies, we know enough. We don't know everything, and we need to continue studying, but we know enough. There's no credible evidence that shows that segregation is better, and there's a long history of bad outcomes. A long history of bad outcomes. So good policy is go with what we know. Go with the data that we have. Go with it. In the US, when I show this slide, people don't know, but Pogo was a cartoon character, and one of the challenges is many people of my generation still running NGOs and services, government ministries, learned the old way. We learned the old thing, and now we're telling them they must change. And change is really about people and behavior. It's not about laws and policies, though policies certainly help. We need to see the cartoon. So we live in this age of instant information. I tell my students there's no excuse for not knowing anymore. We know enough. But why do we still get people saying we need these new things? We have this epidemic of farms and villages in the United States. I thought I had seen everything when then someone sent me a proposal for 100 people with Down syndromes to live on a dude ranch. And I said, no, this can't be. This can't be. There's no such thing as a need for institutionalization. There's no research base, there's no data, none whatsoever. It's an artificial construct. It's an artificial construct. We've got some work to do. We have some work to do, and this is true everywhere. And sort of the last thing on the list there, if this works, is the second order deinstitutionalization. The programs we developed 20, 30, 40 years ago are now out of date. We have to transform them as well. It's not just closing the big institutions. So we think there's something magic in buildings, and I'm the firm believer that magic is best left to magicians. It's not tile and carpet and brick and mortar. It's about having relationships in your life. It's about being able to shut the door of your bedroom. I've seen so many cases where we had people with challenging behavior in the institution. We move them to a home in the community where they have their own room, and half the behaviors go away because they can just shut the door. Stan does this all the time. Deinstitutional, he can't fund universities, so I don't have to be nice to him. But there are four main tasks relative to deinstitutionalization. We have to help people leave, but that's only one. We have to support families, because families are caring for most people. That even the data that Ari showed, even our data, doesn't count all the people living with families getting no public support. We have to prevent institutionalization and close admissions, and then we have to build community capacity for all. And it's a chicken and egg thing. You can't build community capacity for everybody until everybody's in the community. And you're, in a sense, experimenting with people as they're moving into the community, but you have no other choice. You know, people should live in homes, not home-like environments. And home's a place where you choose who you live with from the CRPD. You know, you have a key to the front door. Staff don't, unless they need one. And it's not a place. Most deinstitutionalization has been about real estate. How much care you need is no relationship at all to the real estate. The type of real estate, yes. The size, no. And then we have a tool called the Supports Intensity Scale. You can measure how much support people need. It's been translated into Hebrew and about 25 other languages. And inclusion's not a place. You can't find it on a GPS. You cannot find it. You can find segregation, however, especially if you use Google Maps. You can find all sorts of interesting pictures of buildings. So I'm going to change that. So these are the things we've done wrong. My generation has done wrong. We've segregated people in employment. We've placed people in group homes without asking them who they want to live with. We've renamed institutions. We've rejected medical professionals, which was a tragedy in the U.S. So we've got to stop doing some things. We've got to stop saying to families as you go through this process over the next 10 years that people are going to live independently. Nobody lives independently. Not anybody here in a long-term relationship, except maybe Stan with his dog, don't live independently. We are interdependent. Interdependent builds social capital, and it builds strength. All right. If you've been in a long-term relationship, how many men in the audience have heard the following phrase, "You're not leaving the house dressed like that, are you?" Right? Fairly typical phrase in my house. But independent living scares families. They know their sons and daughters aren't going to be independent, but they can be interdependent and supported in ways that make sense to them as people. So we can't do what we've always done. Right? We've got to do some things. And I think I'm a college professor, and you have to, most college professors think they have 10 IQ points on Einstein, so every time I do a presentation, there's one Einstein slide. But we can't do what we've always done. It won't get us to the right place. Got some rules in working with families, and it takes time and patience. I used to be the Director General of the Family Association for People with Developmental Disabilities in the United States. I'm not going to even pay attention to your sign. But we've got to spend time and do this, and we've got to do it one at a time. I said we closed this big institution in Pennhurst doing it one person at a time, sitting in parents' living rooms talking to them about their son or daughter who had been in one place for 30 years. We're asking them to accept things they cannot see, because you can't show them a community program. You can show them a house, but in most cases we don't get the house until we figure out who's going to live there. And we have to trust this, because most of us, especially if you're a medical professional, we told people 20, 30, 40 years ago your child will be better off in that place out there, and now we're telling them your child will be better off over here. So were you lying then, or are you lying now? Right? You're lying in one way or the other. Families need to understand that public policy is changing in Israel. You know, if you have enough money to write a check for your services, fine, you can do what you want. But if you're dependent on public funds, public policy is changing. We also have to talk about success stories. It's something we do very poorly. We assume everyone knows, yet there are remarkable success stories here in Israel and other places. And we have to solve problems. There's stuff, if you move 10,000 people out of institutions, there will be problems. Things will happen to people. You have to fix it, and you have to fix it quickly and be honest about it and learn from it. So I'm not going to go through all this because we're way out of time, but you can't do this without independent monitoring. In every state in the union, we have a legal advocacy group that monitors things independent of state government and NGOs. You can't do it without independent monitoring. You need long-term data, and you need to start collecting data before the first person leaves, because you have to know who they are in the institutions. And people who collect the data have to have unfettered access to people in the community. You can't say, well, you can only come Tuesday from 2 to 4. It doesn't work. So I've got a checklist. We don't have to do the 10-step checklist. You'll get this. You can get all these resources online that tell you sort of where the data came from. And finally, so we've got all these constraints. You know, now what? If you can read the caption at the bottom, the phone is ringing, there are 2 cows sitting there. Well, there it goes again. We just sit here without opposable thumbs. Ireland has great philosophers. The U.S. has no philosophers, but we do have Yogi Berra. And he said the future ain't what it used to be, which turns out he plagiarized it from a French philosopher, so we're really behind. And I'm banned from France because every time I give a talk there, they sort of boo. But thank you very much.
Thank you.